Good morning. I want to share that I'm with Russ Harding, EQengineered's .NET practice lead and one of our principal consultants and architects, and Julian Flaks, EQengineered CTO. Thanks for joining this morning, guys.
Good morning.
Julian, I'm going to start with you. We've been asked several questions from our clients and prospective clients lately, and as we focus on modernization, I thought to ask if you could share several considerations that you think they should be aware of as they consider Java-focused technology.
Well, that's interesting. Java technology, as you know, we're dealing on both sides of the spectrum with the Microsoft and the open source stacks, and there are some nuances that hit that Java ecosystem. I feel like just like there are more patterns and more things happening in the industry, like there's more choices than ever with Java, and sometimes choice is good, and sometimes it's a lack of constraint that can point people the wrong way. The JVMs have become more complex now that licensing issues have started to bite people from their regular go-to, and Amazon's Corretto and OpenJDK have really filled that void. Frameworks are one of the biggest ones to come to, but even at the language level, we've got new patterns kicking in where Java was always slow to catch up, kind of took a pride in how slow it was to evolve, and now it's really trying to be up there with every other language. And some of those patterns are very powerful, and I think as people modernize, it's important not just to think they're just going to change the dependencies, but to make sure their patterns are something everyone can feel good about and energized about in the code. The ones I'm thinking of are just the asynchronous patterns. We've had async servlet for a while. We've got the completable futures, but also the streaming API. It really changes the game for how some of the nuts and bolts are done down within methods. Within frameworks, it's an interesting story. We have one huge behemoth in the form of Spring that has been managing to stay ahead of the game. It's still over 50% usage. But in the microservices space, some people are definitely getting traction with things that are newer, faster to get kicking off on a new instance, and just more adapted to the microservice world. And frameworks are one of those very strategic questions, because depending on how tightly you couple to them, depending on how long the support cycle lasts, or even without the support, just how long their popularity in the community lasts. There's real long-lasting wins and losses that can be made by your choice there. I think with that, the usual things apply. I favor the long cycle of Spring, but just be very aware, if something's only been popular in the last year, maybe you'll find people trying to understand it now and add it to their resumes. In 2 years' time, it may be something nobody particularly wants on their resume, and it'll be harder and harder to find internal or external talent to help you out.
That's great. Thanks, Julian. Russ, kind of in the same vein, I know you're doing a lot of work with .NET and dotnetcore 3.0. Wonder if there are several lessons that you think we've learned that might help technical organizations that are looking to modernize their Microsoft technology stack and direction.
Yeah, I think there's a few things to keep in mind. But first and foremost, that just from the amount of work required in order to convert from .NET to .NET Core, if you have a really older legacy application that has been very feature focused for some time, the transition from .NET to .NET Core is going to probably require a bit of work. So definitely think about that as you start to map out that roadmap a little bit, because the patterns, the flexibility that .NET Core brings to the table, the way that it handles a lot of the dependency injection and the other components of it, especially middleware is concerned, is different than the .NET framework. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, that this isn't going to be something that you're going to be able to just change the project file and move over in a sprint or maybe even two. You're probably talking a couple of 3 months worth of work if it's a really big application that hasn't had a lot of technical debt work. This is also a good opportunity to take a look at some of those third-party libraries, because a lot of them, as we are working on some of the projects that I've been working on, some of those libraries have gotten older. Some of them are not necessarily compatible with .NETCore, especially if you're starting to think about .NETCore in the vein of, well, it now supports multi-platform. So if I want to be off of a Windows platform, do those third-party libraries that I'm using, are they licensed to be used on these other platforms? Are they even compatible with these other platforms? So that's work that you could potentially do ahead of time before you even make the switch over to .NETCore, and get yourself ahead of that a little bit and give yourself some real clear milestones as you're working through this. Some of the other things that once you get into .NETCore, you'll start to notice is that it's much more modular, much more flexible than the original .NET framework. It makes much more native use of dependency injection. You don't necessarily have to, but it is a big component of the .NETCore, and it makes it very easy for you to be able to very quickly build and integrate your own components into the various pieces of the pipeline, whether it be in your middleware, your authentication, whatever it happens to be. And also allows you to potentially pull in and replace components of .NETCore itself. So the dependency injection framework itself is one thing that comes to mind. You can actually replace the native one with a third party like AutoFac or something like that very easily. It's pretty much just one line of code once you reference the AutoFac NuGet packages. So things like that are very easy to do. You can switch out a lot of the native functionality very easily in .NETCore, especially if you have some compatibility or features that you need to have access to that third-party libraries bring to you that .NETCore isn't quite there yet. The other thing to kind of think about is, again, more of a philosophy is, pay attention to the different types of releases that .NETCore has. You've got your current release cycle, and then you have your long-term release cycle, and they generally are varying. So every other release is considered a long-term support, and those are going to obviously have support for much longer. But the current releases are generally only going to be good until the next release and then a couple of months. So .NETCore 3 is a real good example. It came out and really was surpassed by .NETCore 3.1 very quickly. And so now, even at this point, 3-4 months later, .NETCore 3.0 is not supported anymore. 3.1 is really the one to go forward. But those are some of the things that you should probably be thinking about up front. This is an opportunity to sit down and look at your technical debt, figure out exactly how you want to handle the application, and see how you want to bring it forward. What are your technology needs? What are your expectations over the next couple of years? And how do you really plan on using .NETCore? Do you want to be leading edge, bleeding edge, or are you okay with something that's, do you need something a little bit more stable that's going to have a longer term support pattern and much more flexibility that .NETCore brings to the table as well?
That's great. Appreciate that, Russ.